we're doing is updating our long-range transportation plan. This will cover what needs we have till 2050. And realistically, we do update this plan every 5 years. So keep in mind, it's a long-term plan, but it also has some short-term implications. And the other thing to keep in mind, to be eligible for federal funding, a project has to be in the plan or consistent with the plan. And FHWA and FTA do check this for consistency, as well as Tennessee Department of Transportation. So what we're here for today is, give you a presentation, and if you've got any comments or input you would like to give us, this is the time to do it. And this is one of our outreach programs. We have others. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kayla Ferguson from KCI, the consultant who is helping us develop this plan.
Thanks, Glenn. I hope you all can see my screen. I know you all probably already saw this, but when you all joined, I think I've mentioned this to some of the folks that got on a little bit earlier. John, you may have been the last to join, but your microphones and your video are currently turned off. If we continue to have such a small audience, but a quality one, we will undo that feature later on. Just to kind of give you a quick rundown about what we're going to talk about today. Again, this is just like a quick agenda. We're going to first talk about the MTP process, which I know a lot of you are probably familiar with, how it's developed and how it furthers progress in meeting regional goals. We're going to kind of give you an update also on some existing conditions analysis that we've done thus far in the process. And then at the end, we're going to talk about our next steps for developing the MTP. And then we're also going to have an opportunity for you to ask any questions. And again, we'll unmute your mics and allow you to turn on your video at that point. We're just trying to minimize some of the potential technical issues. So with that, we envision it'll probably take about 15 minutes to go through the presentation. So hopefully we'll make good use of that time. So to go ahead and jump right in, the Johnson City region, which is shown on the map here on the right, is home to more than 50,000 people. So by federal law, a planning organization is required to take the lead on policy decisions that impact the region's transportation system. And so in the Johnson City region that you see here, the agency is the MTPO, and that stands for the Metropolitan Transportation Planning Organization. And they are responsible effectively for transportation planning in what's called a metropolitan planning area, or an MPA, which you can see over here in this dark, thick boundary in this kind of light green area. So as you can tell on the map, the MPA actually covers a portion of 4 different counties, mostly in Washington and Carter County, with small portions in Unicoi and Sullivan counties as well. So to coordinate and plan for the region's transportation system within that area, the MPO is required to develop a Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the MTP. And that utilizes this general process shown on the left with these 4 key components. The MTP process first kind of looks at how the existing transportation system functions today. And then from there, we take a look at how the region is expected to grow over a planning horizon. So as Glenn mentioned, for this effort, it's about 25 years in the future, at least. And we try to see how that forecasted growth and residents and then also in jobs is going to impact the transportation system, and how we might need to invest in certain areas of the multimodal system to make sure that we address those needs. And especially a big component of the MTP process is making sure that we're addressing those needs in a fiscally responsible way. So before diving headfirst into the technical analysis, the MTP process kind of starts at a 10,000-foot level and begins with identifying regional goals. And in the Johnson City region, all transportation planning efforts aim to do these 4 things. These are the high-level regional goals. They aim to improve the safety and security of the residents, mitigate traffic congestion, promote sustainable economic growth and livability, and then also enhance regional access to and from the area. These goals are obviously pretty high level and kind of aspirational, but through the planning process, they're translated into more specific objective statements and then eventually supported by different performance metrics that help us assess how well we're achieving those goals through plans and then eventually projects. So to answer the question of, how are we doing as a first step in the MTP process, we kind of dive into that existing conditions analysis. So to start off, we take a look at population. It's an easy thing, and I'm sure most of you hopefully participated in the 2020 census. And data from that effort actually shows us that the Johnson City region, which is again is shown on that map on the right, is home to approximately 171,000 people, which means that, interestingly, about 11,000 more residents have come to the area since the last time this plan was updated and adopted around 2017, 2018. So Glenn mentioned that the MTP is revisited every 4 to 5 years. So the last time this one was adopted, we've grown by 11,000 since then. And this map specifically shows the population density. Hopefully you all can see that. And so with the warmer colors being higher areas of people per square mile. So you can see that, as expected, the incorporated areas of Johnson City and Elizabethton and even Jonesboro to some extent are the most densely populated. And then, as I mentioned before, we kind of need to take a look not only at existing conditions, but the future growth that's projected for the region. So in this plan, we're projecting to the year 2050, which is also known as our horizon year. And so by 2050, we're actually projecting that the region's population is going to be well over 200,000. Similarly, we also take a look at employment because we know that it's the combination of people and jobs that really generate a lot of trips on our transportation network. So currently, there are about 71,000 jobs in the MTPO area, with the majority residing in Washington County. We actually project about a 25% increase in jobs by 2050, which equates to about 18,000 jobs as shown here on the slide. And interestingly, the graph on the right illustrates how we anticipate the mix of employment by type shifting in the 4-county regional area. So consistent with national trends, we see service employment really growing a lot over the next 25 years, while jobs in areas like manufacturing and then also agriculture are really kind of expected to either decline or stay flat. And again, just for reference, service type employment is everything from healthcare and social services, education, food service, financial and IT type of work. So it really encompasses a lot. But the trend in the Johnson City region kind of follows that of what we're seeing nationally too. And one thing that's interesting, and a question that we get a lot, is when we tell people you're going to grow by this many people and this many jobs, they kind of ask, well, where on earth are we going to house all these people? We're already really built out. So to answer that question in the context of the MTP, we usually take a high-level look at the land uses in the MTPO area because we know that those ultimately factor into local zoning ordinances and then eventually development decisions. So shown here on the map and in the pie chart are the existing land uses in the MTPO area. So we know, and it's pretty intuitive, the color green, which is agricultural land, comprises the most acreage in the MTPO area, followed by mainly residential uses. And you obviously see the commercial in red, and you see a lot of the public uses out by the National Forest in Carter County and whatnot. And so we know that the agricultural land specifically is an area that could turn over into future development. But we also know that there are some areas in some of the downtown cores that may be, able to be redeveloped in the future if they're, underutilized. So we go through a process in the MTP of trying to assess where, at a high level, relatively speaking, not parcel by parcel, but trying to figure out where future growth in population and jobs will reside based on this type of data. However, we also know that when it comes to development, just because a parcel is vacant or has, an accommodating land use associated with it, doesn't mean that it can actually be developed. Because particularly in this area of the state, there are a lot of environmental and natural features that make development a little more difficult. So as shown on this map, the region's steep slopes, which are kind of in green, here, and also the proximity to things like the national forest, even floodplains, water features are all factors that we have to account for when projecting where additional people and jobs will choose to locate and be able to locate in that 2050. So kind of switching gears a little bit, in tandem with the projections of population employment growth, we are taking a look specifically at the impacts of that growth on the region's multimodal transportation system. So the Roadway Network in the MTPO area consists of almost, or I guess a little over 1,600 miles of roadways, most of which are local roads. The nearly 500 miles of arterial and collectors help connect those local streets to much larger facilities and popular trip destinations. And so the 19 miles of interstate are, of course, Interstate 26 in the MTPO area, which we know provides a lot of access to the greater region. And one of the things that really helps for Johnson City is providing access to places like Kingsport and Bristol that have other employment and bringing employees into the MTPO area. And we know that commuting patterns kind of reflect this. We can even see that I think there are something like 1,000 residents from Sullivan County that actually commute to Washington County every day for work. And so a lot of these folks may use 26 or 19W, just different major roadway facilities that we're looking at in this plan. And we know that those types of commuting patterns, as well as travel for other purposes like school and shopping and others, can result in congestion on the roadway network. And obviously, this is mostly experienced during those morning and evening peak hours. And we can identify areas that experience bottlenecks based on passively collected speed data from things like navigation apps on your phones, smartwatches that track your movements. And that data ultimately lets us see how long and how often those bottlenecks are impacting the roadway system and its users. And so interestingly, when we pull this data, you can see the different bottleneck locations on this map. And that large red dot in the center is one of the most severe bottlenecks in the region based on how long a queue forms in that location, as well as how long it lasts and the speed of vehicles that are traveling through that location. And it occurs actually near Roan Street and Bristol Highway, which is a signalized intersection. And it actually creates queues that back up something like, almost 1,000 feet, almost to the interchange with State of Franklin Road, which is a pretty significant queue. So it's things like that we're going to be looking at in this plan when it comes to congestion. There are other ones, obviously, across the region that you can see in those bigger orange circles. There's one on the Bobby Hicks Highway interchange up near Gray, and then also some on 321 in Elizabethton. So they are happening all over the place. It's not just in the urban areas, but also some of the rural areas as well. So, and just to go ahead and mention, there were about, I think, 500 occurrences of different bottlenecks across the Johnson City region. But part of our task in the MTP is to really kind of pare those down and see where recurring congestion happens. In addition to congestion, the safety of the transportation network obviously impacts the quality of life for residents. So we take a look typically at a 5-year span of data. So trying to avoid the effects of travel patterns changing in the COVID pandemic, we took a look at 2016 to 2020 crash data. And what we found is that there were about 27,000 crashes on the roadways in that time period. And as shown here in the pie, or not in the pie chart, but in the text, there were about 515 fatal and serious injury crashes within that time span. So the majority of all of those 27,000 crashes are actually not vehicle-to-vehicle crashes. So shown in the pie chart, that gray large 53% represents crashes that didn't actually occur with two vehicles. So these can be crashes where people run off the roadway and hit, a guardrail or a ditch or a telephone pole or something like that. So that's pretty interesting. And the heat map on this slide also shows, kind of the concentration of some of those crash patterns. Interestingly, too, it's not really pointed out on this slide, but within that 27,000 crashes, there were also 171 of those that directly related to vehicle crashes with pedestrians and cyclists. And we ultimately know that the safety of vulnerable users like walkers and bikers is directly related to the provision of safe multimodal facilities on the roadway system and off. And so part of this effort is to also look at the infrastructure that's available for those roadway users. So this map here shows the extent of the bicycle and pedestrian facilities in the MTPO area. As expected, the majority of sidewalks are located in the urban areas, so mostly in downtown Johnson City and in Elizabethton. And you see some of those brown lines scattered throughout the more rural areas that are, potentially in residential developments or small community centers and things of that nature. In the blue, you see some dedicated on-road bike lanes. And then also in the green, you see some of the off-road trail systems. Again, some of these are neighborhood paths. Some of these are more official trails like the Tweetsie Trail, for instance. But we know ultimately that connecting this type of infrastructure can facilitate not only trips made by exclusively walking and biking, but then also trips taken by transit. We know that walking and biking are obviously very oftentimes the first part and the last part of a transit trip. And in the MTPO area, there are two transit providers. One is Johnson City Transit, which provides fixed route and some demand response service within the Johnson City limits. And then we also have NetTrans. I think we have some folks on the call from that today. And they provide primarily demand response. So not on a fixed route, but the ability to provide trips as needed with more flexible origins and destinations. The map on the right shows the Johnson City fixed routes, so where people can access those routes all the time for the most part. And the bar chart actually shows the number of trips provided specifically by that service. And we can see that it's generally remained pretty consistent, looking, pre-2020, when obviously the pandemic really put a hit on transit trips really across the country. So hopefully we'll see that rebound here in the next few years. So with that kind of wraps up the existing conditions and data analysis that we've done. I did want to highlight real quick just the next steps in the process because it is a long one. When we start to look at all this data, we've got a pretty good handle on what the region system currently looks like, but we still have a lot to do. So this first bullet here talks about some ongoing technical analyses that are upcoming in our future. Specifically, we're going to be using data on existing conditions to look at both current and future travel demands on the system. We're going to be looking at gaps in the bicycle and pedestrian network and identifying transit service needs long term. And then from that point, we're going to be looking to compile a list of potential capital projects that address deficiencies in the system and balance ultimately the cost of those projects against available revenues. And so with that, you might find yourself asking, what you all can help do in this process. And as Glenn mentioned, this is one opportunity to provide engagement. We have some online efforts. This screenshot here on the right of your screen should show this pretty well, hopefully, but we have an online survey and mapping application that's out there. It's on the MTPO's website, and if we need to, we can pull that up. But it gives anybody in the area the potential and the ability to tell us kind of how they would like development to occur. So when we look at projecting where future jobs and people are located, where development is likely to occur, also looking at what their priority is for regional goals, also looking at the map specifically gives people the ability to look at and identify areas where they experience challenges and see the need for some sort of project or improvement within the transportation system. And that ultimately helps us inform that project list that I was mentioning before. So as we move through the next 6 months or so, we're going to be coming back to the public with that draft list of projects for consideration, and then eventually with a draft plan. So with that, I will go ahead and put this here. There is a QR code here on the screen as well as a link that'll take you to the MTPO's website, specifically on the MTP update.